Hi, everyone. Today, we are so excited to have with us Gayathri Ramprasad. Gayathri is the founder and president of ASHA International and the author of memoir Shadows in the Sun. Her successful battle in overcoming debilitating depression taught her the power of hope and holistic wellness. And now she shares that message with others. Since the launch of ASHA International's wellness campaign in 2006, Gayathri's keynotes, wellness workshops, and cultural competence trainings have reached more than 50,000 people, nationally and internationally, with a resounding message of hope and recovery. Individuals and organizations alike applaud Gayathri as an agent of hope and transformational change. And today with Flawless Foundation, we are so grateful to have you here with us today, Gayathri.
I am equally delighted to be speaking with you, Vrinda. Thank you.
Yep. So just to get things started, we know that this is an incredibly unprecedented time and a great, there's a lot of change going on, a lot of uncertainty. So how are you doing personally?
I am doing much like the rest of our global community is. Some days are good, some days are a trial, and some days are plain difficult to get through. Through depression and through anxiety and suicidality, that started when I was 18 years old. So for the last 4 decades of my life, I have had the opportunity to learn to create a lifestyle that promotes health and well-being. And so in this time of crisis, in this time of incredible stress and uncertainty, and really loss and grief, all of the wellness practices that I had in place for the last 40 years are really what is holding me up. Yeah. And just to tell, to share a few things when I talk about my own wellness practice, I start my morning every single morning with pranayama. And that it's an ancient school of deep breathing techniques that originated in India, where your family and I are from. And so every morning I start with breath work, and then follow up with transcendental meditation. And just the practice of stilling my breath and sitting in meditation every single morning, going to that place of quiet and of solitude, really centers and comforts me in ways that is life transforming, always has been over the last 40 years. And as hard as it was for me to learn these practices and then to have the discipline to practice it day in and day out, no matter where I was in the world, it truly has been life transforming. And following my meditation, I also take the time to journal every day. And many years ago, I also got in the habit of me reading my journal entry from the same day a year ago.
Oh, wow.
And that has been so powerful because it has helped me understand. So for example, right now we're going through COVID and, the racial injustice and so much turmoil in our world, in our lives, and, in the lives of our loved ones. And even amidst all of that, reading my entry from a year ago reminds me the cyclical nature of life. Just because we're having a hard time today, or maybe we're having a great day today and had a terrible day a year ago, or vice versa, it's cyclical.
Yeah.
Right? We need to go with the flow. And it's the only way to surrender to what is and to live in the flow of what life is. So yeah, so in addition to pranayama and meditation and journaling, working out at least 5 times a week, just moving my body, even when I don't want to, even when I don't feel like, I always feel so much better when I'm done. So that's been a huge component as well. And, at least the weather gods are smiling upon us, especially here in, Oregon, where it rains much of the year. The spring and summertime is beautiful. And I am an avid gardener and find so much peace and joy in just being in nature. So that's been a huge help, even though we're all staying put, at home, which I totally support, for the health and safety of all of us. There's still nature, the garden to walk into and to learn from and to embrace and to love and to care for. And so that's been a huge help as well. And just being connected with my friends and my family has been such a huge factor For the first time in the history of the world, in a long time, certainly in my generation, I think, and yours, we're all experiencing the same thing. And
Right.
so it's not difficult to have empathy for each other at that level. So that's been a huge support. And the work that I do through ASHA International, um, quite literally to be able to share our stories of struggle and of resilience, to let people know that they're not alone. No matter what they're feeling today, they're not alone, and that we're in this together and there is hope. We are the evidence. We have all collectively overcome so much in our lives, and we will continue to overcome. And so that's so comforting to me, to be able to show up every day and do the work that I do. And that gives me hope in so many ways, right? And, and not to forget to feed ourselves,
Yep.
consistently with healthy food, and, having some fun, whatever it is, whatever fun is, maybe watching a silly movie or a TV show or playing a word game or whatever that fun
Yeah.
is, to be able to make time every day for a little bit of joy, and a little bit of chocolate goes a long way for me. Chocolate with nuts is even better.
Dark chocolate with nuts.
I know, right? Dark chocolate with nuts, come on, and whole nuts, yum, yum.
That's all you need.
No. Last but not least, make sure to get enough sleep every day, right? And then start all over again. So far, it's kept me together, and I
Yeah.
have faith it will keep all of us together. Just self-care and reaching out and staying connected with our loved ones, and doing something that brings us meaning and joy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More now than ever before. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, no, these are great self-care tips, some very tangible things that we can strive to accomplish.
Yeah.
And just, I guess, speaking of your story, would you be willing to share a little bit more about your personal journey and how you got to where you are today and what you've kind of learned over these past 4 decades through this practice?
Sure. I was born and raised in Bangalore, India.
Mhm.
It's in the south of India, the heart of all outsourcing. I watched this city go from being the garden state of India to this city that's exploding in every single way. And so yeah, I was born and raised in a family of 23 people, extended family as tradition went, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. And as a child, it was the most joyous, loving upbringing. It was fun to be surrounded by all those people and all that love and attention. But by the time I was 18, I was very confident that I was on my way to med school to make my dad's dream of becoming a doctor. I mean, what more could an Indian ask for? Right? I was doing well at school. I was the good girl, well behaved. And I thought I was going to make my parents so proud of me.
Mhm.
And I remember going to check the results after my second year of undergraduate and finals. And there in Reading, I saw next to my name, failed. And I remembered that my world had collapsed around me. I couldn't breathe. My heart was beating so fast. My thoughts were racing. I became nauseous and disoriented. And I remember running as fast as I could to my house and collapsing at the door. And my mother asked me, "What happened, Gayu?"
Mm.
And I couldn't even, I couldn't talk for a long time. And finally, I told her, "Mom, I failed." And she was just as confused as me because I'd always done so well at school. And she said, "No, there must be some confusion, honey. Don't worry, I'll send your brother. He can go check the results again," right? Well, long story short, what had happened was there was a boy in my class and he wanted me to be his girlfriend, and I had no interest. And all year long, he had threatened to make me sorry. Revenge, he said. He had bribed the registrar and made me fail.
Gosh.
And I know many people who might, watch this conversation might go, "What?" Well, in a country like India, money talks. And it's a patriarchal culture even today, and men can make things happen. Men, money, power can make anything happen. And I had no way to cope with what was happening. And when I went back to college, he threatened to rape me. So I had failed in math, just to make things clear. I hadn't failed the whole year of college, but I had failed in math, which I'd been good at. And that's why I couldn't reconcile what was going on. So not only had he made me, bribe the registrar and made me fail, he would threaten to rape me. And I had no way of coping with that. But I also had no way of talking about it with my parents, because at that time I had very short hair, wore miniskirts and jeans, much to the horror of my mother. And when I would tell her, Mom, these men on the way to college, these boys in college, they bully me, they say these rude things to me, she would say, look at you. If only you dress differently, if only you put your head down and not hold your head high and look people in their eye and behave the way you are and dress the way you are, you wouldn't be treated the way you are. So I knew I couldn't go to my mother to share these, all of these terrifying things that were happening, right? And yet I didn't know how to cope with it. And so what happened was I began to have panic attacks. Now I didn't have the language for it. I thought I was losing my mind, that I was going to die, right? And there were no words to describe what I was experiencing. And my parents had no words to comfort me either. Neither did my family physician, because, and this is true even today, a lot of people go through years and years of hell before they actually get somebody that sits long enough to understand what is happening in their lives, not what's wrong with them, but what's going on in their lives, to understand that there is more than just physical health here at play, right? Because what my parents and my physicians caught on to was the fact that I was puking my guts out, because the panic attacks would make me so nauseous that I couldn't breathe, that I couldn't eat, that I couldn't drink water. So they were all trying to keep me hydrated and keep me fed, but nobody really cared about the emotional well-being, because they were ignorant, because I wasn't even part of the conversation back then. And unfortunately, it isn't even now. And that's what breaks my heart. And that's what also strengthens my resolve to do what I do every day, to show up and to speak about mental health is integral to who we are, just as important as physical health is. So going back to my story, nobody understood. There was no, conversation about the emotional aspects of my, being. And so for the next couple of years, I just did what I was, expected to do. I put my head down. I studied harder. I graduated with honors. And sure enough, as soon as I graduated, my mother got me married. Isn't that what a responsible parent does? She found me the best groom that she could find. And yes, he is a wonderful man. We're still married 37 years later. A gold medalist in his engineering program from IIT, the elite engineering, schools of India. And he was working here in Portland, Oregon, at Intel, one of the greatest companies in the world. And so, can you believe the luck, the sheer luck of their child, right? But behind all of that facade of the festivities and the celebration of the wedding was me, a frightened 21-year-old who was terrified whether her now soon-to-be husband and his family would find out that there's something very wrong with me. Remember, we didn't know what was wrong with me, but something's very wrong with me, and that they were going to send me back to my parents, that I was going to dishonor them publicly. And it terrified me. So even as my parent, my mother and my sister and me were going shopping for saris and jewelry, I would lay there crumpled on the sidewalks of Bangalore, puking my guts out, terrified that I was going to bring such shame and dishonor to my family. Let's fast forward the story. 11 months later, I was hooked to an IV tube in a hospital the night before I left my hometown, Bangalore. Again, there's panic attacks, not knowing how to cope with it. And now I had to leave the country. And literally, I was taken out of the hospital and put on an airplane for the first time in my life. I'd never been on an airplane in my life. And yeah, I navigated my way from Bangalore, India to Portland, Oregon, through all those flight changes, not knowing if I was going to live or die, because I was so dehydrated and threw up the entire time that even people on the flight were getting concerned for my safety. But I made it. I made it to Portland. Nobody knew what was going on, on my husband's side of the family, because again, the fear, what are they going to think? Yeah. What are they going to do if they thought that there was something wrong with me? Is he going to divorce me? Are they going to send me back to my mom's house? Who's going to, marry my brother and sister if that happened, right? So here I come to Portland, and miraculously, most of my symptoms vanished for a while, only to come back with a vengeance when I had my first child. Now it was postpartum depression. Again, I had no language for it. All I knew was that I so wanted to be a mother and I so loved my baby, but all I felt was darkness. I cried most of my days. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to sleep. I couldn't sleep. I was agitated. And now there were thoughts of harming myself, or the fear that I might inadvertently harm my baby. And I was just completely terrified and alone, because I couldn't share this with my husband or his family, his parents who were visiting me then, because now I was terrified that they're not only going to divorce me and send me back to my family, they're going to take the baby away from me. So that went on. And we thought, oh, a trip back to India is going to be a quick fix. And it wasn't. When my baby was 18 months old, I finally made my way back home to India, and I had a massive breakdown. All the trauma, all the pain, all the isolation, all the suffering that I'd held inside just came bursting out. And I tried to kill myself several times. 7.5 years from the onset of hell, I was finally sitting in a psychiatrist's office with my mother in Bangalore, India, and she draped her sari over her head and she whispered to me, "Gayu, I pray to God nobody finds us here, because if they did, our lives are over." It's not because my mother didn't love me. She loved me dearly. She loves me dearly. But this is the fear, the stigma, the shame that all of us experience when a person and our loved one is struggling with a mental illness. I knew no better. I mean, I was rushed into shock treatments, ECTs. I was rushed into antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications. I was rushed into psychotherapy. My in-laws are a very loving but very religious, superstitious family. Invited a priest to come home to exorcise the demons in me, and he molested me. And for days, I was catatonic. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I was so traumatized. And the one question, who are they going to believe? Me, a diagnosed crazy woman, or a man of God? And I share these stories again to highlight that people are going through these traumas as we speak. Unspeakable traumas, but unless we speak about them, we can't stop them. I didn't have the courage to speak then. Days before we came back to the US after that trip, we went back to my psychiatrist in Bangalore, who was treating me, and asked him for my medical records for continuity of care here. And it is there in those medical records that we read that my father was diagnosed for suicidality and depression and treated by the same psychiatrist the year before. Neither my father, nor my mother, nor the psychiatrist thought that it was important to share that with me. And I say that, again, because there's such shame and secrecy even within families that we don't talk about it. And I remember turning back to say goodbye to my father with such compassion and such a deep sense of betrayal and rage, wondering, Daddy, if only you could have shared your pain with me, if only you could have told me that I'm not alone, that you too know what it is like to suffer like this. But he couldn't, not then and not for decades after, right? So I came back to the US after that trip, and I got pregnant again by accident and got even more depressed and tried to kill myself many more times. Finally coming to a place of deciding that I needed help. And no matter what fears that I had in my life, that my child needed me, that I deserved to live with dignity. And so I chose to go back to my therapist, and she advised me to check myself into a hospital. And I was terrified, and I told her, I'm scared that they're going to lock me up. And she said, no, they're not, because you're going in voluntarily. They're not going to lock you up. But they did. after the initial intake and the question if I was thinking of harming myself, which I answered honestly I was. They not only did I get confined in the seclusion room once, but twice within 10 days, and I lost the pregnancy. It was the most traumatic time of my life, and ultimately life transforming, because it is during those dark moments that I ask myself questions. Am I crazy, or is the world around me crazy? Is psychiatric care therapeutic or traumatic? What is the purpose of my life? And I answered that day that for every day that I had lived in despair, I would fight to restore my dignity and bring hope to the lives of people like myself and families like myself. I had no idea how to do it, but that promise kept me alive. And in the pursuing years, the next couple of decades, as I began to learn how to live well, this promise continued to keep me, well, and just focused on that one thing, that one day I would transform the pain in my life into purpose to give hope to just one person like myself. That's what kept depression. My sister developed schizoaffective disorder. And with my sister, especially for almost 2 decades, when the phone rang, I didn't know if she was dead or dying, because she tried to end her life that many times. But with every trauma, my determination to stand up and speak up just grew stronger. So nearly 17 years from when I made that promise in the isolation cell, I started ASHA International. ASHA literally means hope in Sanskrit, which ancient language that originated in India, and also India's national language, Hindi. And in English, it's an acronym for a source of hope for all. And at ASHA International, that's exactly what we do. We give hope. We give hope through the power of personal stories. And why personal stories? It is during that hospitalization, a stranger came to visit me. My husband's boss's mother-in-law's friend. She had overheard about my suicide attempt and the hospitalization and had insisted to come to see me. And I was so ashamed to see her. I was ashamed to see anybody. But still, this is the duality of culture. Yes, there are cultural barriers like stigma and shame, but there's also such beauty in culture, such strength in culture. Being raised in India, the very first prayer that all of us children are taught is Matru Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, Atithi Devo Bhava. Basically, I offer my prayers to my mother, my God, father, my God, teacher, my God, guest, my God. And I realized, agonizing whether I should meet this stranger who had come to visit me in the hospital or not, and saying, no, she was my guest. It didn't matter if I was in a psych ward. She had taken the time to come see me. And the only way that I could respond is with an open arm, to embrace her and welcome her in. And it's the best decision I have ever made in my life. Because in the next few moments that I spent with this amazing woman, I always remember her as, having the grace of Jackie Kennedy and the compassion of Mother Teresa. She was just this amazing Armenian woman in her 50s who just held me in her arms, shared her own struggle with depression, and her strength and her resilience, and how she had built a beautiful life for herself despite her struggles. And for the first time, she gave me the gift of hope that has sustained me throughout my life, throughout recurrent episodes of depression and suicidality and all of that. And so through ASHA International, her name was Aida. It's Aida's gift of hope that we are passing on forward, that we are paying forward every single day in everything we do, because Aida taught me the incredible power of stories to let us know that we are not alone, that we're in this together, and together we can overcome anything. And more than anything, Aida reminded me that I had the strength within me. No matter what the outside world told me that I was, whether I was lazy or possessed or crazy or whatever, she told me, don't believe them. You're an amazing, strong human being, and you have the power within to rebuild a beautiful life for yourself and for your family. Yes, it's going to be hard, but you can do it. I am so grateful to Aida. Every single day. I lost her several years ago, but I always remember her legacy of hope, will literally live on forever. So that's my story.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing such an inspiring and powerful story. There are a lot of things that I drew from that I could resonate with culturally, especially, Hassan Minhaj actually coined this thing, not coined it, but he really has popularized it. Log kya sochenge? What will people say? What will people think? And I think that is just such a pertinent question, especially regarding mental health.
So important. And again, it's worth repeating, Vrinda. What will people say?
Yeah.
For us South Asians as a community, as a diaspora, people living around the world, it is one of the biggest questions. Mm-hmm. Being a collectivistic culture, this is the dark side of it. Mm-hmm. We care more about what others think and say about us mm-hmm. than living our own truth. It is that question that my husband asked the day I chose to get hospitalized, sitting in the therapist's office. When the therapist told me, Gayathri, I can't keep you alive. You've got a disease that's going to compel you to kill yourself. The only way I can save your life is for you to save your life, for you to go to the hospital, get educated, get empowered, and take charge of your own life, and let go of the cultural misperceptions and stigma and shame that is so heaped upon you right now. And I remember sitting there staring at her, my husband asking her, what are we going to tell our friends? What are we going to say? And me being so heartbroken and enraged for being raised in a culture, brainwashed as a woman, that I needed my husband, that I needed my family, that I needed my community to, stand by me. And for me, my only job was to honor them and to protect their honor. And here he was asking me a question. What are we going to tell them? What are we going to say? What are people going to think, right? I've never felt conflicted emotions like I did that day. And I told him that day the truth. I will speak my truth with everyone every day from this moment on. I went on for years holding on to that rage. It's good. It fueled me into the work that I do, but also it was by a chance. I was sharing my story at a NAMI conference several years later, and a man was sitting there crying his eyes out, an Asian man. And at the end of the conversation, at the end of the presentation, I went up to him and I said, "I'm sorry if I caused you any pain." And he said, "No. I was crying because I am your husband. Mm-hmm. I am a care provider for a wife that is struggling, and I don't know how to protect her, how to care for her, and I don't know how to deal with the societal stigma and the shame. I don't know how to be." Have you ever asked yourself how your husband must have felt? And I'm glad he asked me, because it's in those moments that empathy for my husband was born, right? True, I had this righteous rage. How could he ask me such a question? Would he have asked me that question had I had cancer? Had I had a heart disease? Had I had any physical disease for that matter? No, actually, he would have called all the family and friends and said, "My wife is sick and we need your help, we need your prayers." Mm-hmm. And everybody would have responded. But this was depression. How could you ever tell anybody, right? I mean, how shameful is it? What's going to happen to the families standing in the community? Our family's honor. Who's going to give him a job? Who's going to marry my child when she grew up? Right? What's going to happen to her educational opportunity? But I'm glad this gentleman, the stranger, asked me that question and, gave me the gift of empathy for my own husband, because it could have easily been me asking the same question too. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say, as toxic as stigma and shame is, and as much as it tears families apart and communities apart, we have to come back together with love, with compassion for each other, so we can do the difficult work of once and for all ending stigma, ending shame, and understanding mental illness and mental health for what it is, an integral part of our humanity, of our safety, and of our well-being. And we have to work together in building communities of empathy and of support and inclusion where all of us can thrive.
Well, thank you for sharing your truth, especially as a South Asian woman. I think that that is just so incredibly important, not only for our community, but also other communities like ours that have harbored this social stigma against mental health. And especially for creating a foundation like ASHA Foundation to really spread that hope and, through storytelling. And I just want to ask you, I'm sure you've heard dozens of stories over your lifetime, and is there anyone that really stood out to you, something that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, honestly, Vrinda, I have had the privilege of listening to hundreds of stories and personally videotaping more than 150 stories around the world, all ages, all identities, all cultures, and every single story is inspiring to me, because every single time that I listen to this story, it just strikes me both at the trauma that a human being endures, but also even more so, the incredible resilience within all of us. And that is what gives me hope. That is what gives me energy. So I really welcome you and anyone who is listening to our conversation to come visit us at myasha.org and see for yourself, feel the power of these stories. But having said that, I definitely will share one story. Hoda Abwaish. She's one of our, there's so many, but I'm just going to share one story. Hoda just graduated from high school and she's on her way to college. When she was in middle school, she was sexually abused by a family friend. And she didn't know how to cope with it. She didn't know what was happening to her. She was traumatized and she was confused, and she turned to self-harm. She started cutting, and it got worse and worse and worse. The only thing that Hoda, held on to was her academics. She was excelling at school and she focused all her energy in school. But then that began to struggle. And by the time she was in high school, she really started to struggle by her sophomore year. She could no longer focus. She could no longer turn her assignments in on time. And she did the bravest thing a child can do, I think. First, she tried talking to her family, and the family did not, validate her experience. So that made it even harder for her. But then she did the bravest thing she could do, to turn to a teacher and share her struggles. First of all, she emailed all her teachers and said she was having a hard time and that she needed more time to turn her assignments. But then it's always that one person, right? That's something we all have to remember. For me, it was Aida, a stranger who came to hold me in her arms and share her story and give me hope. For Hoda, it was one of those teachers that took the time to stop her in the hallway and say, "Hey, I'm sorry you're having a hard time. I'm here for you anytime, any day." And she took him up on that. And it's important. She was being abused by a family friend who was a man, and she still trusted this teacher who happened to be a man, and shared everything with him. And as you know, and I know, right, they had to call Child Protective Services and initiate all of the circle of support that we need to when a child is in danger. Call the parents, call the cops. And she was terrified. She felt totally betrayed that the one adult that she had finally trusted to confide in had betrayed her trust. And yet Hoda will stand tall today and tell you that it's the best thing she ever did, because what happened afterwards is what inspires you and me, right? She got the help she needed. She is a student. She graduated with honors, served as a student body president. She was one of our most impactful speakers through ASHA International. She's one of our most powerful youth storytellers, reached thousands of students through our Let's Talk About Mental Health high school programs, started our very first My Story, My Superpower Club in her school, and launched the very first mental health week, not a day, a week-long program to start the conversation about mental health and well-being in her high school, which really brought thousands of students and teachers and staff together in this life-saving conversation, right? So yeah, there are so many stories like Hoda's that I would love to share. Again, come visit us at myasha.org. Feel the power of these incredible people for yourself. And when I say that, it's always there's a catch in my throat because I have to follow that up and say, you know, the picture, the vision, the perspective of so many people in this world of a person with mental illness, which was very much what I had until I experienced it myself, was this half-naked person running down the street, talking to themselves, people pelting stones, calling them crazy. That's what we think when we think of a person with mental illness. No, that is the picture of a person that didn't find the love and the care and the support they needed for a health condition that they struggled with and they suffered from. But here's the other picture, the duality. When we find the love and support, the treatment, the compassion, the opportunities, you will see children like Hoda blossom. You will see somebody like me blossom and to realize our own fullest potential, but much more importantly, to contribute to our world in meaningful ways. And that's what I want the world to envision when they think of a person with mental illness. That here's a human being with incredible potential to become an asset to our family, to our community, and to our world.
Yeah. Thank you again for sharing that. And yes, definitely, so if anyone's watching this, please go check out the website. There are probably, how many stories are up there? Probably
more than 150 at this point.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. So yeah, just kind of switching gears. Speaking of, you know, like the Mental Health Week, July is also designated as Minority Mental Health Month. So what are your thoughts about having an entire month devoted to minority mental health? And you know, there's also been this transition to calling it BIPOC Mental Health Month that doesn't include people from other underrepresented groups such as LGBTQ+, differently enabled, you know, just to name a few of those other types of, you know. So what are your thoughts about that?
First of all, what do I think about Minority Mental Health Month? I think every day of every month of every year should be.
There we go.
Because, and I'm not trying to be exclusionary. It helped. You know, my daughter has a very valid point when she says, Mom, you should start focusing on health, and because that's what it is, you know, because already there's this partisanship between physical and mental health, and that's not true at all. This is, you know, we're one integrated being. So yeah, I think all of us should be focusing on our mental health, physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, social health, intellectual health, all aspects of health every single day. Having said that, if it helps us to remember, oh yeah, mental health, forgot about it, we should make it a point this month to focus on it. Great, by all means, you know, let's make it a point. The word minority makes me laugh because, you know, I may be a minority in the US, but I am the global majority, you know? So it's meaningless when we use that word minority. I come from a country of 1.3 billion and many more Indians around the world. And I'm not trying to be excluding again. I think of all of us, you, me, all of us as part of being a part of the human family. So who cares what our culture is, what our gender is, what our identity is, what the color of our skin is? Doesn't matter. We all belong to one family called the human family, and we should all be focusing on our health and well-being every single day. Talking about underserved and underrepresented communities, I totally am invested in it, both as a person and as through, you know, as an organization we are, because representation matters. Growing up, I grew up with a lot of stories, right? Whether it's Bollywood or Mahabharata and Ramayana, the whole spectrum, but I never heard a story like mine. Not one, a story of a person struggling with their mental health and overcoming it. Never heard that story. I wish I had, but it wasn't until I was locked up in the psych ward that a stranger came to share her story with me. And so I totally believe not only does representation matters, we need to make it matter every single day in every single way. And I promise through our organization, we will do everything we can to make that happen. What I mean by that is representation through our leadership, whether it's the board, for example, representation through our storytellers, our team of storytellers, the stories that we gather and that we share, we will be very, very much focused on providing this platform for those people within underserved and underrepresented communities to become, not only to inspire, to share their stories, but also to inspire hope and ignite change. Because we can do it. Our stories have the power, not only to save lives, but to create social change. And so, yeah, we are very, very invested. And just as an example, so for the last 3 years, this will be our third year, we have been presenting Grit and Grace, a multicultural women's mental health conference. And I do not know of one single conference like this where it brings women of color together to share to connect with each other, support with each other, celebrate our resilience. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing when you can create a space where women can speak their truth and be celebrated for their truth. And I am so excited, so excited. Every year I am, just with the lineup of speakers that we put together, and I am even this year. And again, come to our website, check it out. You'll hear all about it. And yeah, and this year, on the one hand, we will not be able to meet in, but then again, that's the other important lesson I learned with COVID. In a world where we all have to live within walls for the safety and well-being of all of us, we can create a world without walls through technology. And that's what we are doing right now. You and I, speaking, or even through the Grit and Grace conference going virtual, we want to break open any walls that are and welcome everyone in to experience the power of stories in person,
sure.
virtually.
That's awesome. And just going off of this cultural content, I also saw that ASHA is conducting cultural competence training workshops. So I just want to ask you, what exactly does that entail? And, how do you kind of conceptualize the different ways in which cultures see mental health?
And so much of that work was really driven by my own exploration and understanding my own journey, and it's been incredible. For example, the cultures of India and America, the East and the West, they're so divergent. Just for a couple examples, right? India is a collectivistic culture and the US is an individualistic culture. How do you reconcile the two? For me, coming from a collectivistic culture, when my therapist told me, and I should explain for those that may not understand what that means, is in a collectivistic culture, a person doesn't exist on their own like they do in an individualistic culture, right? You exist only within the context of your family and your community. So here I am, born in India, collectivistic culture, living in America, individualistic culture, seeing a white Caucasian American therapist who's literally doing her best to help me, and in the most loving of ways tells me, it's time for you to cut the umbilical cord, Gayathri. You gotta cut ties with your family. They are very disruptive to your health and to your safety, and so you've got to cut ties with them. And me just looking at her going, what? Cut ties with my family? What does that mean? Where would I be? It's like a tree without its roots. My family are my roots, and if I cut myself from my roots, where will I be? How will I live? How will I exist, right? It took me years of work to understand what she was saying and to interpret in my culturally responsive way, right? What she was trying to say to me is, walk away, to educate yourself, to empower yourself, and not be bulldozed over by your family or by your culture or by what your cultural stigma is or the shame is, or you're not going to live. Essentially, it's a question of sanity and insanity, life and death for you. So I had to learn through a lot of pain how to do it. And how I did it was to convince myself I need to walk away from them, from my family, from my culture, from my cultural misperceptions, the stigma and the shame, long enough to become strong enough myself to be able to go back to them and to educate them in turn. So walking away was not turning my back on them. Walking away was to save myself so I could save others like myself within my family, within my world, right? And so that's an example I can give. And there's so many like that, so many, right? We have to be acutely aware and humble, most of all, humble. And when I say we, I mean all of us, whether it is we as individuals, our families, our care providers, our treatment team, you know, the healthcare professionals. No one needs to know everything, but we should at least know enough to be humble to say, I don't understand. You know, I'll give you an example. The second time that I was confined in the seclusion room, the nurse asked me to give her my Mangal Sutra. And as an Indian, there were, at that point, I thought there were only two measures of my success as a woman: marriage and motherhood. And as a woman from India, the only time that I would be forced to part with my Mangal Sutra, which is a necklace that my husband puts around my neck, you know, during all this auspicious ceremony during the wedding, the only time I would be forced to part with it is when I become a widow, which in my culture is a curse worse than death. And so I tried to explain to the nurse, no, I'm sorry, you don't understand what you're asking me to do. I can't do that. I can't give you my wedding necklace. And she kept insisting, no, it's hospital protocol. And I kept saying, you have to understand, I have had this necklace since the minute I was married and for years now. And I had it even the last time I was locked up in this isolation cell. And like, no, you know, it's this hospital protocol and, you know, we're scared that you're going to hurt yourself with it. No, I won't. It's a sacred symbol of my marriage. And no, so we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. She was a wonderful nurse. She was trying, but she couldn't understand. And there's so much trauma inflicted, right? We can prevent that if only, and which is exactly why we present the cultural competence trainings, to say, you know, let's understand each other. You don't need to know everything, but at least be humble enough to understand that you don't know everything, and be curious to ask the questions. When a therapist tells a client, you know, you need to cut your roots with your family, what does that mean? How is it perceived by a person who is from a collectivistic culture where the family is everything? When you tell somebody to give you a symbol that is sacred in their culture and they won't, that is not a symbol of them not cooperating, not an example of them resisting care. You know, because what happens in that situation? They're going to confine you even longer, right? And that's going to re-traumatize everybody, not just me. I'm sure it's traumatic for the nurse too to have to do that, right? So yeah, we have a long way to go. And it just starts with humility to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're going through right now, but I want to. Teach me how I can help you. Yeah.
And as an aspiring physician, like I definitely think that cultural competence, and especially like these kinds of trainings, are so important for, you know, during medical school and beyond. And I really hope that wherever I do end up going to medical school, they do really emphasize the cultural component. And if not, like what
and if they don't, you make it a point to make it happen. You know, your voice matters. You have more power than you think you do. And the other part of, you know, the equation is what's happening in our healthcare community right now, right? I mean, the suicide rate here in the US among physicians is shocking, absolutely shocking. And I recently read a heartbreaking story of a physician who lost her life to suicide in New York, I think. And her family's heartbreak and everything. And there's the same amount of stigma and shame within the healthcare professional community, right? We've got to break the silence. We have, and not all of the research and the statistical information alone is going to make a difference, right? We can quote 1 in 5 people, you know, are struggling, and every 40 seconds we're losing a person to suicide. Well, stand up if you're a healthcare professional and share your own story. And that's, you know, one of the most inspiring stories in our collection of stories is by a child psychiatrist, a career child and adolescent psychiatrist, Diane, who only 2 years ago by accident happened to be at one of the events where our storytellers was sharing her story and was inspired to share her own story of living with bipolar disorder, right? And physicians like her are going to be the way forward. And so for you as an aspiring physician, my wish for you is that you continue to stand up and speak about your own humanity, about your own human experience, because that is the surest way to connect with other human beings. When you share your own vulnerability, your own story, and when you can build that trust, you can heal a person. Without that, you're just treating them. You're not healing them.
Yeah.
So whatever form of medicine that you're going to study and want to, delve yourself into, make sure that the voices of the people, the lived experience is just as much a part of your education as the clinical knowledge is.
Yeah. For sure. And I guess last but not least, we always like to end off with just asking people what gives them hope, and specifically, what would a flawless world look like for you?
What gives me hope?
Mm-hmm.
Youth like you. Youth, I'm going to say children. I don't mean to embarrass you in any way. Children like you who have the courage to talk about what matters to them. Children like you who are not worried about what will others think, what will others say. Children like you who will stand up and ask the difficult questions because they truly care about the world that they live in, not what most adults think of you children as, social media addicted, shallow people. I know some people have that perspective, but no, I really, children like you give me the greatest hope. Children that are curious, that are honest, that are humble, that are brave, and that are so passionate about building a better world for themselves and for others. What does a flawless world look like? A flawless world to me looks like a world where you and I and everybody else in this global family of ours will come together in solidarity, no matter what our differences, no matter what the color of our skin, no matter what our identity is, that every single one of us, at last, we rise together, we stand together, and we will thrive together. That is what it looks like to me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Gayathri, for your incredible work and for taking out the time to be here with us today. And to our viewers, you can find Gayathri at myasha.org and learn more about the stories and hear more about the lived experiences, and also on social media at Gayathri Asha.
Just invite them to come to myasha.org and they'll find their way. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Gayathri, for your time and for enlightening our viewers.
It's been an incredible joy and a pleasure. So humbled to be with you. Thank you for your time and for your courage also in asking the questions, the important questions. And I wish you the very, very best. I hope we can stay in touch.